Okay, Jeff, how are you? Good to see you. Good. Saw you walking down. I thought this was where you were headed. Wouldn't have been disclosed today, right? So. Right. Okay. We'll get going for the Monday, May 15th Town Council Workshop. Roll call shows that all councilors are present, with the exception of Councillor Robertson, who sent us a note that I'd like to read to the council today. Councillor Robertson says, "I regret to inform you that I'm resigning my seat on council effective immediately. I understand that all responsibility for this decision is mine. I truly appreciate my time on Orono Town Council as a valuable learning experience. And I've had the opportunity to serve my community as an Orono Town Councilor for over 5 years. This position is no longer aligned with my value system and my understanding of council's role in town government. Thank you, Cheryl Robertson." And I want to say it's with regret that I received that note. Although I respect Councilor Robertson's decision and opinion, and I wanted to thank her publicly for the service she's given our community, for the leadership that she has given us in terms of environmental issues and other issues that she was very passionate about, and also the quiet conversations that she and I have had over the past year and a half or 2 years that we've been on council together. I will miss working with her. So thank you, Councilor Robinson. Also, because of Councilor Robertson's resignation tonight, and because we have what I think will be and hope will be a substantive discussion regarding some data that our town manager has provided for us, I'd like to suggest that we not try to crunch in 2 long workshops tonight. I'd like to spend some time talking about the economic data in front of us and reschedule the review of town council policies and procedures manual, only because I don't want to give short shrift to either topic. And I think if we have a full meeting on one topic, I'd hate to give 20 or 25 minutes to a subject that needs longer time. So since we make no decisions in workshop and we can, we have some flexibility rescheduling that, I'd like to reschedule for future date, but not too far in the future date. So I don't want to push these things off. That said, before we go on, if there's any public comment now or at any other time during the workshop, I invite members of the public to speak. We can share online. I'll try to keep a better eye online for comments, but anybody that's in council chambers as well. All right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
What are the consequences of the resignation?
We will have. Yeah, we will have a special election. And Sophie is talking with the town attorney to determine what the schedule for holding that special election is. There is a time to call an election in the town ordinance. And we just want clarification on that before we set the date for a special election. But I think we'll have that, if not by the end of the week, this week, certainly by next Monday's meeting, we'll have the details on that.
That was my question also. So there's no, like when it's happened at the school, I know that we've appointed.
Right.
Is that, because what are we really only 2 months in? Is that right? March? When are council members seated?
March, second week of March.
So we're 2 months in.
So municipal officers are different than RSU directors. The state law empowers municipal officers, not just empowers them, directs them to appoint vacant RSU seats, school board seats. That is not the case for elected officers. Charters can handle it in different ways. So if you go to some communities, you'll see that they can appoint somebody, they go to the last election, they could do any number of things. Here it's very clear. You either run short or you have a special election. If the resignation comes within 6 months of the next annual municipal election, you have an option of whether to call it. If it's more than 6 months, you don't have an option. It's shall language, so you must. My hunch and my reading of the ordinance is that you have 60 days to call an election at some date in the future. This particular seat is, ends on March 24. So if you held an election, let's just say in November, you're filling a municipal officer seat for 5 months. So one of the questions that I have for the attorney is it possible to call an election for the election? I don't know, which
For the June referendum?
I know there's not enough time for the June referendum. No, I just mean, I want to come back with all of the options in front of you. And given, I don't know if you can call the election to run simultaneously with the new election for that seat. It is, you know, to bring somebody on for 5 months is a very short amount of time. I don't know if you can, which is why I want to talk to the attorney.
And you said that's, the charter dictates that,
Yeah,
so, and there's no
There-
room for interpretation within our charter that's, we go back to the last election, or we.
no.
It's kind of, timing is kind of.
Can I just say that timing that upsets the flow is never good, Leo?
Yeah, it just seems like, right, and we call one, get one, like you said, then it's 5 months left.
And you know, so if she had just been elected and something happened, that special election would fill the seat to the end of the term. I think that's the question is just where it's such a short amount of time. And I wanted to talk with somebody who is intimately acquainted with our charter because it's not simply mirroring state law.
Thank you so much for looking into that.
Yeah, so I think we will have some clarification on that sooner rather than later, right? We don't want to delay on this so that we can have a full council as we deliberate, at least if not the budget, the things that are subsequent to the budget. Also wanted to remind people that we had a very kind request from a member of the public that we project and speak loudly for the benefit of people in council chamber and also for the benefit of the recording. I will remember to do that.
Will Belle let us know if we're not?
Oh, she's good at that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank
but
you, Val.
sometimes we get lost, especially if the band kicks on, our voices get lost in.
Thank you, Belle.
Okay. So a number of counselors over the past few months have asked our manager to put together a review on data of a number of budget trends in town, starting with trends regarding town personnel and staff members. Sophie has done that and put together a tremendous amount of data. It was a huge lift. We've asked her to go back and revise this data a number of times. And I think we have a lot of information in front of us, and it might take us a little while to sort of get down to what we're comfortable with, how we know how to interpret it and things like that. So that's really our job tonight. I would ask us not to ask staff for more data until we're comfortable understanding this.
Yeah.
So that is my only introduction to this, and I have not asked Sophie to prepare opening remarks or comments on this. I thought that might be a good job for council to do. Since we asked for the numbers and we asked for the data, I'd like us just to start, similar to how we've started our budget discussions the past couple of weeks. So if there is anything in the data that has been presented to us that maybe is unclear, maybe that's a place where we should begin.
I can't answer that, but can I kind of begin maybe a little bit just with a different? Because I was part of the group asking for this information, and I think I appreciate all of that you're getting inundated. I appreciate all of the effort pulling this stuff together, Sophie. But I will say that my goal for the finance committee, and it's not for next year, obviously, is to standardize sort of these kinds of requests. So we know, so we're not doing this in an ad hoc fashion in the midst of this obviously busy season, especially for staff. So do think, I think 100% that we should be looking at the trending data because it really is the big picture discussion. So I think this is a really good approach that is different than it's been done in the past years. So that's my comment I'd like to make is that I do think this is important information. I'm glad we're going over it. And I do want to standardize this going forward, that we start out looking at the trends. And I really think that we start out before department heads build their budgets with what our standard increases have been. We've had typically 3 or 4 years ago, it was a 3 or 4% increase to operating budgets. The last 2 have been 9, 10, 11. This year's looking at 10. So there's been a shift there. And I think when we start out now, we're talking about what are we going to cut? But realistically, we're actually talking about reduced increases. These aren't technically cuts. So, and it's semantics, I guess, to some degree. And that's how they talk about every budget at a public level, I know. But it is, I think the sooner we start, and again, so before they start building theirs, if we say, okay, we want a 4 or 5% operating budget increase, not a 10%, then we're not, the cuts, the reductions happen outside of here, but I just think that this is overall a healthy process for us to do.
So, yeah, I don't dispute institutionalizing it. I think, and I said this to Sophie last year when we saw these kind of graphs for the first time. It's so helpful for me to see the picture of it, to see the graph of it over time. So maybe continuing to build these graphs, right, will be easier. One of the things that, we know has happened in the past 2 or 3 years is that the sort of unprecedented jump in wage scales was not to give our employees, and we can see this in the data, not to give our employees like a tremendous jump, but really to bring them up to the market wage or as close to the market wage as we can afford. So hopefully we're there, right? I mean, hopefully we're close to there. And we won't see the need for an 8 or 9% increase.
Yeah.
Again.
So I would just say that if you look back, I think one of the pitfalls of looking so globally is that you miss the decisions that drove the budget. So when you look, bring it down to a department by cost center evaluation, what you see is of the 1.6 million that you count, that you talk about increase.
You're talking about capital increases, you're talking about.
I was talking about operating.
I think operating has gone up 1.3 this year
Yeah.
and 3.4 over the last 3.
1.35 million of that is attributable to public safety. And it is attributable to adding positions to meet minimum professional staffing. It's attributable to taking firefighters that were earning $13.35 and giving them an hour and giving them a raise so that we were not violating minimum wage laws. So when you start out far in the hole, it's really hard to incrementally bring up professional workforce. The other thing that I think is important to understand with most definitely public works, public safety, is that the workforce has completely shifted on a dime. It is a workforce that used to be fairly easy to bring people in. People don't want to be police officers anymore. They aren't really thrilled about being firefighters. And so if you look at just the region and the expectations, the number of hours that they want to work is down and the pay is up. And so I think when you're looking at that increase, while large numbers are good to look at, you know, each one of the decisions to bring a staff person on or to make a raise was done in an environment where there was all sorts of information available to the council that sat at the time. So, you know, I guess so.
Just quickly looking at wages, Sophie. Just this, we obviously, I'm not sure what you're talking about 13, but this goes back to 2018. Maybe it's because overtime is built into this, but there's nothing south
So-
of 22 an hour in here.
Yeah, if you're looking at firefighters, that's based on working 50, getting paid for 57 hours a week, not 40. So, and I think maybe the 13 was the contract before that, so it may have started in 16, but that's what the contracts have been addressing. And we still are in the bottom of the region, although we expect more. We expect hazmat, we expect paramedic level licensure. So, you know, we can talk about that with public safety. I don't disagree with the broad brush stroke, the looking at trends. I think that's a healthy thing to do. I think one of the problems with emails and brief conversations that are flyby, you can add a lot of tone to it that may or may not be there. And it feels at times like there is the belief that we are somehow padding this budget for things that we don't need. And that's why it's all here in black and white for you to tell us what you don't think we need.
I appreciate, you know, how much detail goes into the explanations for every single budget line. And I see, like, your job is to advocate for all of the things that you see, given the service level that we've set for you, what you need for these things. So I think it makes sense that from your perspective, every single one of these items, they're accounted for. They make sense. And I guess I do appreciate that we're looking at it from a slightly larger lens, partly because that seems to be more what our role has to be. In addition to being informed about all of these details that help make sure that we're not missing, you know, the reasoning. But I would not suggest that you're padding the budget with things that you don't need. I'm not trying to suggest anything like that. But I am grateful for our having this conversation because we have to be thinking about this. I mean, there's a lot of money that we're asking people to pay. But certainly, I appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I understand where you're coming from. Your job is to advocate for this budget in some way.
Well, I mean, I want to be really clear that my job is to advocate for resourcing operations with what we think you want for service level.
Yeah.
My job is not to determine the service level, and if you decide to cut things, that's entirely within your purview. The one thing that I will really try to protect against, because I've seen it happen in so many communities, is where the answer becomes, we want the service level and we're going to do it by not resourcing, either not paying people fairly, expecting two people to do one person's job, not giving the tools and the resources, the materials to meet the service level. Outside of that, whatever the service level is council's choice. And I'm not going to advocate for you to do something, provide a service that you don't want to provide. I mean, that's not my job.
No, and I definitely am of the mind that all the items here, I think paying people fairly have got to be like very high priority. Whatever we're asking people to do, they should be compensated more than adequately.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there is a misunderstanding or a difference of understanding within council about what service levels we have asked town staff to provide and what service levels we're expecting.
I can say for me, Jeff, I don't think it's about that. I think it's like prior to that for me. Like, I don't feel like I can talk adequately about service levels and how serious I think I need to be about cutting them without first understanding the bigger picture about what's been going on with our budgets. I don't know if we need to cut anything or not. I came at this from the perspective of what I need to be able to explain to taxpayers, right? If they ask me, why have we gotten this much extra money from the state every year for the last 3 years and still raise taxes? I think there could be a very good reason for that. I just want to be able to answer to people why. I want to be able to say this part of it was because we needed to bring our personnel salary and wages up to the level they needed to be. And this part was because we had all these capital projects we needed to do. And I'm not sure if they were delayed, but if they were delayed, why? I'm guessing from state cuts previously. So for me, it has really, this is like for me, this is prior to even making any decisions about service level, is understanding where we're at, so that I can explain kind of where we are now, and how we got here. And then if we're going to make a choice to go with the exact budget presented, I just want to be able to say to people, yeah, I voted yes, and here's why. Because I really think that our personnel need to get paid the same as everybody else in our area. And because these capital projects are really important to me. And I can't do that without first looking at these big picture questions. Otherwise, I can know that a part sounded important, but I don't know how it fits into the whole. So for me, I would hope that, sort of what Leo said, I hope that we will look at these big picture questions first when we start our budget process, and then get into all the details of each department. But that's just me.
No, I think that's fine. I think that's legitimate, that we need to have a global understanding of what we are asking our staff to do and how to explain that to the community. In a way, though, what we're asking staff to do should be driven by our conversations with the community. So I haven't met anybody that says, I want fewer firefighters. I don't want a police officer checking on me if, my porch light is broken or something like that. And what we've heard consistently is we want more community policing, and we want our firefighters trained at a higher level, right? We want paramedics and not EMTs and things like that. So knowing that that's the request that we seem to be getting from our community, I personally have been more comfortable with the wages that we have, meaning not this council, but the previous councils have put in place. But maybe we need to articulate that better in some way.
Did you have your hand up? Susan?
Yeah, I will say some of my constituents and people who have talked to me do feel that the trade-off between, like, I think that we all value public safety. We all want to live in a community that is safe and that has people who will show up in case of emergency, and are trained to respond accordingly. But there's a trade-off in size and in professionalism needed for all of that. That's a real trade-off when we have finite resources trying to, fit infinite needs, as Sophie has, framed it really aptly before. And definitely some of my constituents feel that, like, probably we could get by with a tiny bit of delay in fire response, and with maybe fewer police sort of patrols, and there may be more police on bikes instead of in cars, which I know gets complicated with the Maine winter, but this is a thing that my constituents have definitely pitched to me. And so I don't think that it shouldn't be out of bounds to raise the question, well, should we think about service level changes, given that we are, trying to meet infinite needs in a finite budget? And I think this town does a great job and is quite a wonderful and safe place to live. And I think that we could perhaps still continue to be a pretty wonderful and safe place to live, with a slightly lower service level in some of our public safety budget lines. So I think I personally am willing to entertain that.
And so we're going to talk about public safety specifically.
Yeah,
It's our
I'll look
upcoming
forward to
budget
that.
meeting.
Yep.
And we're also going to talk about the suggested cuts at Thursday's meeting. So we're not really getting into because that does get to the service level, right? Because that's kind of.
So I want to be really clear. Number one, they're not suggested cuts. They are, I was asked we would
Yes.
pull. They are from a staff perspective, based on conversations with councils over time. And they're about what can be pulled out without making things collapse. So, there is
Yeah.
that.
Suggested in the terms that we had asked you to suggest.
Yeah, I just want to make it very clear. I wasn't saying we should.
I think we're up with.
Sorry. So with the, sorry, Dan, you can go.
But what about the Eagle View budget questions? Is that a good place to kind of go through some of these trends and talk about kind of what it was that has gotten us to these, what's behind the trends other than just the dollars on the spreadsheets, so that we can kind of understand and set our framework going forward. Is that a good place to kind of, since we have a document in front of us with some bullets and some numbers?
Yeah, we can start there. We may not have to go through all 14. It is in the interest of time.
Sure.
But maybe we should start with the first one. Sarah, do you want to introduce the first topic that you?
Sure. Does everyone have a copy? I brought some printed ones if anyone needs one.
I don't think the audience has them. I did not.
Maybe they like them? I brought extras. Is that okay? Okay, I don't know the rules. Sorry, I'm pretty new. Okay, right, okay. There you go. That's the spreadsheet that came with it, and that's the document with questions. You can just pass them out. There's multiple copies. I just didn't know if anyone else wanted it, to leave it on a chair. Thanks. Yeah, so at the beginning, I was just looking at stuff I think we've mostly had answered, but I wanted to start from this big picture for myself. I remember being told our debt ratios were like excellent, like way below what they could be. Do I have them correct, Sophie? Because those were from my memory. Is that approximately right?
Yeah, approximately right.
Okay. And then on the fund balances, which is our bank account balances, Sophie had a note in the binder about being told by our bond agents in 2020 that we needed to increase our balances. And I could see that they went up from 20 to 22 and then down again in 23, but the whatever it's called, unassigned funds didn't come down. So I just wanted some clarity. Is it only the unassigned fund balances, Sophie, that we need to keep
Yeah,
at a certain level?
I can do some fast talking around the assigned because council has authority over assigned. But if you look at our fund balance, that we have a significant amount of it that's restricted,
Mhm.
that they won't count towards it.
Okay, and what they asked for us was to hold our unrestricted funds at what level exactly, just so we know as a council?
So we have said between 11 and 15% of the previous year's expenditures.
Okay,
What they were seeing is a trend of that going down. And they were saying that if it continued to go down, it would flag us.
got it. And that hasn't gone down at all from what I saw. That's gone up and stayed solid since 2020, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. It was me just wanting to clarify because I wasn't sure. Did everybody else already know that it was only the unassigned ones that mattered? Is that just a me question?
No, I was glad you asked it. I
Okay.
think it's great to just make sure we're all clarifying these details.
And that is just money in the checkbook.
No, not necessarily. So your fund balance is combination of unspendable, which would be our diesel and gas inventory. It is restricted, so funds that council can't spend any other way than an outside agency has told you. So TIF funds would be restricted funds, grant funds would be restricted. In this past audit, you saw $1.6 million of unspent bond proceeds as restricted dollars and $675,000 that we were holding in escrow till we could get the fire department engine in. So those all, when you make those expenditures or spend the money the way that they are listed, will bring the fund balance down. And over time, there was a time that we had a much higher fund balance and we kind of eaten away over it at times. That was not because we were taking unassigned fund balance. Sometimes we do, but that was Orono Economic Development Corporation sold 3 Godfrey Drive. They owed the town a bunch of money, including money for repayment of a general obligation bond that could not be prepaid. And so that money sat in a designated account until it was paid. So that's why we lost almost $2 million of assigned funds.
But if it's really just the unrestricted that they were worried about on the bonds, we're excellent on that as far as I can tell. And you agree, right? We're fine in our unrestricted levels for that right
I
now?
wouldn't say excellent. I would say we're better.
Adequate. We're where the bond people wanted us to be. Okay, thank you. That was my only question
Using
there.
Unrestricted and unassigned is the same, is that right?
Yes.
Question, it was just a statement for me to clarify that that is only our share of what taxes would be increasing for folks in the proposed FY 24 budget. I mean, obviously, that's not for any person, that's the whole thing. The next one on the bullet point I had was, I can see clearly that we're getting 1.3 million increase in money from the state on the revenue sharing this year. And in reading the budget binder, I couldn't understand why it's gone up so much from FY 23 to 24, because the budget binder told us we reached 5% revenue sharing in 23. Is that correct, Sophie? So what happened that we went up again?
Yep, so revenue sharing is, when you say 5%, it's 5% of forecasted, or at this point, it's forecasted revenues, sales tax, certain financial taxes. I could go through the list, but I don't think that really matters. Money comes, 5% flows into the treasury. $4 million of that is immediately peeled off, and it goes into revenue sharing 2. So revenue sharing actually is 2 buckets of funds. Revenue sharing 1, every community in the state can access. And that is calculated by using your state valuation, your state assessed value, which is different than our local assessed value. And it is based on our estimated population as determined by a state agency. So those are 3 pieces of information that flow into a formula, and I can give you the formula if you'd like, or we could just know that it
As a
works.
formula.
You can Google it. Yep.
So as so you've got 4 moving parts there, right? You've got what the revenue forecasting committee, who has economists and other people from the state that sit twice a year and decide how much revenue the state's going to bring in. So that changes from year to year. Assessments, population, and value change from year to year. All of that creates a multiplier that then gets divided into the total, and it changes. So for revenue 1, everybody gets a piece of that. And it's really kind of standard. And quite frankly, it depends on growth or reduction in value in population. Revenue 2 is actually where the town brings in probably more than most communities. And that is because it takes this is where the state recognizes the fact that we are a service center community, in that we have very little value, large population, and a relatively high mill rate. The revenue 2 brings in the mill rate into the calculation. Now, it's not our mill rate. It's what the state says our value is, what we committed divided by what the state says our value. So that mill rate might look different on paper that you look here than what we actually. So last year, we budgeted that we were going to bring in $1.3 million. Last year, $3.3 million. Of that, 67% was Rev 1, 32% was Rev 2. The increase this year that we see is we're going 49%, 59% Rev 1, 40.3% Rev 2. So we're saying we're going to bring in $4.6 million. So this is not an increase that flows standard, like everybody's gonna get the same percent or not. It has many factors inside of it. And where the city of Bangor made changes that significantly would have, had the forecast not been higher, they probably would have lost revenue sharing. So each March or April, depending on when they meet, the revenue forecasting committee creates a multi-page report that gets posted on the website. It goes over to the state treasurer's office. They actually create the computation of how much revenue sharing each community is going to get. And when you see me compare communities, that is where I go so that I can look at value, population, and assess tax commitments in a standardized way.
So helpful. Is it accurate then to say that you think the reason we've gone up that 1.3 is this shift in the percentage of which bucket we're getting money from? Or was there also just the state economy grew and that helped things? Did it grow? I'm
So,
assuming, but
Yeah, if nothing had changed in any community in the state, if the state forecast committee increased its revenue projections, we would all grow at the same percentage. So that it would grow in the same way. Because, and I think the question that was in here was Bangor didn't get the same percentages that we are getting.
well, that was one question, but my bigger question is just why did it grow when it already reached 5% revenue sharing? So
Because the bucket of money that you're taking the 5% in is changing.
bigger because the economy grew in the state?
Yes,
That's what I was
so
wondering.
that means before the state ever started the raids on revenue sharing, the economy was constricting, which meant revenue sharing numbers were already going down. So we were taking the hit, both because of the economy and then because the state decided to raise it.
Makes good sense. Sophie, do you expect these numbers at this point to continue to grow 1 million more a year? I figured not. That was my assumption, but just wanted to make sure I wasn't off on that. Okay, thanks. And I think that's it.
Just the point.
Yeah.
I think for us and why that operating budget growth continues to scare me last year and this year is because when obviously if the state leveled off their funding this year, or if they level it off next year, it's 1.4 million, 3 million, whatever it was increase. If we get level funded, operating budgets don't just go away. Capitals go up and down, a little more fluctuation there, but so what happens next year? Levels off, or worst case, obviously, gets cut, is we either go straight to the taxpayer or there are cuts. There are hard cuts. So that's the biggest thing that I worry about with these 10%, 11% operating budget increases on a yearly basis.
So
They're the gift that keeps giving.
what I was interested in seeing was I had imagined that we had grown our staff like a ton over the past decade. And what the employee count Sophie put together showed me is that we haven't grown that much, right? So the growth is through wages. Right?
Last couple of years.
Yeah. And if that growth is attributed to wages, and we're scared that revenue sharing is going to cease in the future or be reduced in the future, and we're going to end up holding the bag, then we're back to a service level discussion, right? Do we want to employ fewer people? And we haven't had that discussion yet. So I don't know if this is the venue to have it, or in the context of the budget discussion is the place to have it, or as you said, like before we get into the budget, the nitty gritty of the budget is the place to have it. But it feels like we have asked, it feels like there's an implicit accusation there. Like, why is this growing? We know why it's growing. We deferred capital investment for many, many years, and we had to bring our employees up to wage parity with the surrounding area. So yes, Dan.
Is it safe to say that when you talk about deferred capital investment and underpaying, I mean, was that a function of the state revenue sharing not being what you'd expect, so that, you know, if prior councils would have to look for something to constrain, and they'd look at, well, we know we're not paying people as much as some of the other communities, so, but we can't do anything about it right now because it's gonna require a, you know, an ask of the taxpayers that we're not prepared to do. So, so is that how, when we talk about how to explain this to people in terms of, you know, just the six of us having our understanding, but also being able to talk to it? I mean, is there context there that's helpful to?
I mean, I think a couple of things are happening. The state of Maine's wages have grown the fourth fastest of anybody in the country in the last 6 years, 5 years. I have that somewhere. And it has a lot to do with, we increased minimum wage. So when I first got here, I hired firefighters for $12 an hour. I hired public works people for $13 an hour. And you can't do that anymore. The other thing, so that is one reason. There's also a shift in the workforce in general. And that shift, I think, can be summed up in a couple of different ways. The first is that a lot of people exited the workforce, so you know it's hard to find people. We see that everywhere. The town is not immune. The second is that we're not just competing with public sector people, employers for individuals. It used to be we could pick up public works people really easily at a fairly low cost because we had a wonderful benefits package and people valued that. And you couldn't get that in the private sector. Two things have happened, and I'm not saying they're bad by any means, but the private sector is now legislatively required to offer benefits that we have always kind of held the market on. And number two, more and more employees don't care about benefits. And so we're in this catch-22 with the town where you've got half to 3/4 of your workforce that really values the $8 an hour benefit package. But when we're trying to recruit new people in, they don't care. They want the wage to be comparable. So to other places that they could get work. So that is a difference that we're trying to kind of fight against with our workforce. The final one is harder to wrap our hands around, but I think it's what has really impacted the public safety bargaining, you know, the contract for public safety. And that is, if you go back even 10 years ago, people who were police officers and firefighters, they wanted all the overtime they could get. They wanted to they made their money not by how much they made per hour, but by the number of hours that they worked. And they came on all the shifts. So what we've noticed is that, I don't know if it's society, I don't know how it's being impacted, but we have people who want to be partners in their family and they want to go on vacation. And when a baby is born, they actually want to take 3 weeks of leave that they're entitled to. They want to, they don't want to work the number of hours, which is where we got to with the fire department, which is why we ended up putting on the 4th shift so that they worked 24 hours and had 3 days off and then worked 24 hours. So that drives cost. The more people are out in that particular, in public safety, I have to backfill, which is what we're trying to get around with the SAFER grant to try to see if we can save enough money by not backfilling to pay for 3 staffers to come on to kind of wash the overtime.
By not backfilling with overtime,
Huh?
by not backfilling with overtime, so.
Yeah, so that whole safer grant, the argument, and it's not an argument because we didn't fight, but the justification,
It's not,
the justification that Chief Lowe and I came to council with is we were seeing $150,000 a year overspent in overtime for the fire department. When somebody gets injured, the bar for all of us, think about it. How many people here went to work sick and thought it was just the badge of I'm a dedicated employee, and now you show up sick and they send you home, right? Like, so the bar is pretty high, and we were having incredible absenteeism because of injuries and illnesses. And then vacation time on top of that, because they didn't just max it out, they actually wanted to take it. So with the safer grant, the idea was, we think on paper, we can bring 3 new people on and staff it at 6 firefighters per shift, drop to 5 without having to backfill, and save the overtime that approximate overtime that they would.
right,
So right now, it's $246,000 that's being paid for by the federal government. But eventually, we're gonna have to flow that into the budget if it works, or make a decision that we're not gonna backfill, rehire and start holding those positions open. Probably in year 2 or 3, we would have to wait. We just started that program. But to give you a sense, that's part of the reason why we had to grow. So we grew 3 people when we moved the shifts. And now this would grow 3 more people.
the safer,
Hmm.
so there's 6 altogether. That's,
So 3, when we moved the shifts in 2019, when we went from 3 shifts to 4 shifts.
Yeah.
And then 3 right now that you see in the grant fund that are not part of the departmental operating budget yet.
have you seen any impacts in terms of stability within the department, in terms of, people staying on, or?
That's a hard question because most of the time with this department, people are moving either because their families are kind of moving out.
Yeah.
Or because what we had was almost a complete flip of the department. We had so many people that were in for 20 years and then started to retire out. We still have a few people that are going to be retiring out in the next few years, which is part of the reason why Chief and I felt like we could offer the safer as a pilot. Because we know in the next 3 years or so, we'll have attrition if it doesn't work, that we just won't fill.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other part of this story and the point about the operating increases is the 10% is there a narrative around why going into 2025, we're not coming back with another 10%, you know what I mean? In terms of how have we, like the hiring, the changes in the wages, people understand that, people want the town of Orono to do that. To the extent that we show people that we are pivoting to, a solution that is going to have an impact on next year's budget operating costs, that's a positive result that I think most people can embrace.
So up until last year, the town council normally approved a cost of living increase that simply adjusted people's salaries by a flat amount. And
Was it
that,
based on inflation?
yeah, yes, Northeast, all cities, CPI.
Okay.
We stopped doing that a few years ago. I think it was 2020. When it was 21, FY21, when it was 0. Inflation was not 0, but we decided to do that and try to keep all the positions that we had, because in 2021, it was our first budget and we were in the middle of the pandemic. It had just hit. So, when we went to the bargaining table a year ago, we knew that we were making up for a 0 year when there was inflation. When we were bargaining, it was 8%. And we just had 6.1% inflation. So we knew we were gonna have a hill. So our unionized employees, we shifted the wage scale a bit, but if you did the numbers, it was about a 8% 1 year, 8.5% another year. And we are still in the bottom of the region in terms of police and fire. Most definitely in terms of police and fire management. So there's still going to be a hill to climb there when we bargain the next contract. There are some departments here that they are not overpaid, but they are not as under as everybody else when you look at comparisons. But I look at them and I see historically female dominated industries, primarily the library. And I don't think it's fair to pull them to a different wage scale than what the rest of the town doing similar jobs would do.
Sure.
Other than that, there might be an outlier here or there, but we are pretty consistently near the bottom of what the pay is for the region. And I think one of the things, Zach's not here tonight, but he really ran a lot of that comparison, the analytics for that. And one of the things we had the hardest time with is there is no standard expectation for what an equipment operator does, as an example, or a library clerk does, as an example. So you end up having to do a lot of finessing when you try to do those comparables. And what we try to do is find ones that are as like as we can get them and then adjust for what the workload and expectations are for other people. I don't know if that makes sense.
Comparable.
Yeah, because for me, I think it's really important that when you look at responsibility level and expectation skills required, that there is some alignment within an organization of what somebody gets. Not just to what the outside world does.
So we can't just pass this budget, say for the next 5 years, we'll never see an operating increase of any kind.
Well, no, there are there's another 2 years. That's this question.
One more year
I guess one more year after 24, that is still in the kind of makeup.
Yep, so it won't be to the same degree because we took everybody who earned less than $70,000, took where we wanted them to be, divided it in two, and implemented 50% last year, 50% this year. For anybody earning more than $70,000, we did it over 3 years.
What year was that? The less than 70,000?
So it was, we started the implementation in FY '23, so July of 2022.
So whoever was making less than 70,000 in July of 2022.
Yep.
Got it.
And then, just so you're aware, we were using data from 2020.
Right, that's what I wondered, yeah, probably, right?
Yeah.
With 2020 data, so really their salary in 2020 is what counted? Yeah.
And so one of the things we are doing right now is trying to gather the information we can from like communities in the region to see kind of where we are. And I think unfortunately, it's gonna put us right back at the bottom because Brewer and Hamden both have done incredible increases. And when you look at the increase, it's not if you take the 8.1 last year and the 6.1 this year in the cost of in inflation, cost of living, that increase is not the 8.1 and then the compounding it for the 6.1. It is much less. So we're falling behind even in that adjustment.
What year did we do the 8.1 and the 6.1?
So the 8.1, it was the CPI inflation.
Yeah.
In 2020, at the end of 2022, so December 2022. And in the December 2023, it was 6.1.
Makes sense.
So
That's great.
14% in between the two for adjustment.
So it doesn't
Yeah,
work
it
that
doesn't work
way.
like that. She'll do it.
Because if you have your dollar
Uh,
and your dollar becomes $1.08, your 6.1 then adds to your $1.08, not to $1 again. So
it
it's,
compounds on top of
it
that.
compounds.
Thanks. I know.
Right?
Yeah. I did look at Jeff, at the numbers from the page that Sophie gave us about increased FTEs over time.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to see them and what department they were in? I mean, we added 20 positions since 2014. That's a long time ago, but we weren't added 20 FTEs in that time. So it isn't that we didn't add anything. Does anyone else want to see them?
No, I wasn't suggesting that we didn't add anything. I was
We haven't in the
suggesting that
last 3 years,
In
what
the
I,
past few years, and that was really my concern, right, is that I didn't, in the past 3 years, when we've seen the wage increase, we have not seen a staff increase, overly large staff increase.
since 2021, we've added 7.6 FTEs if you include the proposed ones for FY '24.
So those 7.6, should be 7.4.
Oh, maybe I got the 0.4, 0.6 library thing backwards. I don't know.
Yeah, so can we just call it 7.5 to be?
Good by me.
Okay.
Good by me.
So, the 0.4 in this year's budget is moving that communications person who is 16 hours in the library, 24 hours in economic development, fully into economic development, and backfilling their 16 hours at the library with a new part-time person.
Yeah.
And it is, minus, the IT director plus an electrician, so that nets. So it's really 0.4 this year. Last year, the growth of 3 was bringing on the safer, or growth of 4, sorry, was bringing on 3 safers, which are the grant-funded firefighters, plus the environmental services coordinator. The 21 to 22 would be, part of that is bringing on a public safety director. So that decision was when the police chief left and we had a police chief and a fire chief. And we were trying to figure out what to do, and we looked at salaries and we looked at what the applicant pools were like for police chief and what the needs here were. We, instead of simply filling the police chief, we created a public safety director to hopefully grow, mentor, build a police chief and a fire chief for when this person leaves. And we backfilled with a patrol officer in police. So when that came to council, what you saw is that it was cheaper to do that on the books when you looked across 2 departments, more in the fire department, less in the police department. Which is why in police department wages over the last 5 years, you are only seeing a growth of about $97,000, which you would expect to be much higher.
So can you stop on the fire for a minute? Because the numbers you're citing don't seem to match this spreadsheet exactly, so I'm a bit confused.
So under fire, you see safer.
Yeah, I see that went up 3 in 23 and then it's staying steady into 24.
Yep.
So I probably misattributed them by year, so it's by 23 at the top of this, not 24.
Oh, sorry.
But what the other 2, it looks like we added 1 in fire in 22 and another 1 in 23.
Yep, in
Correct.
22, we added, do that. I'm sorry, in 22, that was our public safety director. I got my years confused. I apologize.
No worries.
And then, so there was a public safety director, and when we moved him up to public safety director, that was a body. So the bodies didn't really change. It was the, we backfilled the chief with a deputy chief and we had the life safety inspector. So that was the one there.
The one the year before that then?
The 1 year before we had, floater, I think, to pay for overtime. Before that, we added 4. And that would be the shift.
So in 20 into 21.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So of the 5 that have been added since 2021, 3 of those are safer and 2 of them are not.
Yep.
And the 3 that are safer, you were saying you're predicting that. I mean, either of those have to roll into the general operating budget when the grant expires in 26, or we have to not fill positions as people retire in
Yep.
order to keep that where it was before, correct?
We have to be kind of careful with that because we have to give time for the grant to work itself through. So we would have to hold positions in like the end of year 2, year 3, or else we wouldn't be following the intent of the grant.
Okay. I know you said these numbers before, but I didn't know if I jotted them down right. You said when you did the SAFER grant, there was 100 to 150,000 extra per year being spent on overtime.
Yeah,
Ish, and then the positions themselves are 200 and they're 300 and there aren't they 300,000 basically in the,
246, I think, is what the,
okay, 246 in the grant. So it's slightly more than what we think we were spending in overtime.
yeah,
Except that overtime rate isn't at previous wages, so the overtime rate today would
Got
be
it.
far greater.
So we're expecting the overtime to be somewhat equal to that.
and I think talk with Chief when he's here. They've run the numbers 8 ways. And also, you know, the other piece of that is not just about the dollars, what we were seeing. We had an individual, and it just pops out at me because I was helping with payroll. It was not uncommon to have people working 100 hours in a week to fill overtime, and that's just not sustainable. Money or no money, that's just not sustainable.
To Leo's question, I feel like we're already sort of talking a little bit about number 10 on page 2. I'm really interested in that question. I think Dan brought it up about how are we really able to be sure that we're not going to need to keep increasing this budget $1 million every year, because we've done that for the last 3 years. I mean, our operating expenses have gone up basically $1 million from 22 to 23, 23 to 24, 21 to 22. It was only 0.7, but it's been close to $1 million for 3 years in a row. And we still have salary increases coming in 25, and we don't think we'll get $1 million extra from the state. So, you know, number 10 to me is kind of the big picture thing I'm really wanting to think about as we're building this budget. Like, are we sure that these same conditions that you were saying are causing this increase to happen every year are just all going to be gone from 24 to 25?
Yeah.
And if not, how are we planning
if
ahead for
not,
that?
And I think that this is a question like for council, because it is our job
exactly. It's
to
the
balance the
hard
budget
things,
and be
yeah.
thinking ahead. So I hope you don't feel put upon by this question. It's just like the reality of what we are called upon to think about. So
It sucks.
I think I think it sucks, and it is a good question.
I think, you know, we keep bringing it back to service level. And, you know, one of the reasons why for years and years and years, we had 3 shifts of 4 people on a shift. That is minimum staffing per contract. We will never be able to bargain that away. Part of the reason for that is they could come in, there weren't a ton of calls. You'd sleep here, you might get a call every so often, but it really, the staffing met kind of the need. When you look at NFPA, National Fire Protection Association guidance, you're supposed to staff your fire department to be able to handle a bread and butter call in your community. So bread and butter call for us would be a chimney fire, a house fire, something that we could go, a house fire would be a kind of a bread and butter call. That means they say we should have 15 people on shift. So we're never gonna have 50, right? That's just never gonna happen. But what we're seeing, and we always really relied heavily on mutual aid. What we're seeing right now is everybody is stretched. And so ambulance volume calls are going up more frequently. We are less apt to have a night that you could sleep through than we would have in the past. So we are actually having people working all 24 hours, which means that they're not as apt to have a second job to help augment their income, which drives collective bargaining. But the piece that we have no control over at all is what the state is going to require us to do to run that ambulance service. So a few years ago, we were required to put monitors on our ambulances at $100,000 a piece. When we roll an ambulance to certain calls now, we are required to bring more than 2 people. So when we think about staffing basic calls, and it's not Orono's fault, but we have become one of the default paramedic backups in the region. So advanced life support, if you run an EMT service or a basic service, and you get somebody who needs medication, you need to call for help. Old Town will not run ALS service to some communities. We are now the default. We're going all over the place, backing people up. And part of that has to do with our licensure. So that is, I think a piece of, we can make all the plans we want to try to reduce the cost of our people. But if you're going to run a service, you got to staff it at least to that level. I would argue that idea of staffing at 5 over there is still incredibly tight staffing.
Sure. Do we make money off that service? And do you have the numbers on how much
Yeah,
money? We make?
so I wouldn't say we make money.
Just saying we make some
So
money. It probably
We
doesn't
bring
counteract
in,
the extra
we bring
people.
in about $425,000 a year between what we bill patients that we transport and what we bill other communities. So when we run an ALS backup, we bill the community $150 to go provide that service. If we run EMS in in a contract community, like Old Town's contract communities, we bill Old Town $500, and we have a contract to provide service to VZ, $225 a call. So one of the things we looked at to try to think about being creative, Chief and I were thinking, well, you've got other communities like Brewer. So you're comparing when we compare our firefighter stats in Brewer, you don't even have to be a paramedic. You don't even have to be an EMT. They support Northern Light in their station. And I was like, well, would that save us money? Because we think if we weren't running an ambulance, we might be able to cut $515,000 out of the budget. The problem is Northern Light or a comparable service will charge us somewhere in the neighborhood of $59 per person per year. And it came out, and don't quote me on the numbers. Please don't quote me on the numbers. When Chief did the math, it came out to about $659,000. So we're not going to get as much as we would save, plus we would lose $425,000 of revenue. It came out, taking away that service would actually cost us $500,000 more. So that's why it didn't show up on the reduction list. So the problem we've got with EMS is that there really aren't a lot of other options.
So like, in terms of what you've told us is driving the budget increases each year for the last 3 years, some of the things have been inflation. That's coming down, we hope, knock on whatever. So that maybe is coming down. Supply chain issues, I hope, are coming down.
Yep.
It really, though, looks like most of it is regional workforce demands, and it doesn't look like that's changing
So
anytime soon.
I would say that the regional workforce demands, I'm hoping, are going to stabilize, because we were kind of in a hole before it all hit. We're working to try to come up. It might be a little bit more of a climb to get us there, But I mean, at some point, it has to level out. And I think a lot of what was driving, especially the lower end of our pay scale, was the conflict with minimum wage coming up. And
Sure.
if somebody can go work at McDonald's for $20 an hour, it's really hard to expect them to be a paramedic here for the same price.
You, I think, had a question.
Yeah, just a few. You said that the NFPA would say for our bread and butter, we should staff 1,500. 1,500.
Wow, that's a lot, Leo.
15 people, sorry.
Have great.
Remember-
That 60 total.
But what? Is that something that's just evolved significantly? Because we've always increased staff since any record of time we have, fire people. And we've always in significant increases. So does NFPA, well, obviously it's not something that we're bound to, otherwise we'd have 60 people.
I think one of the differences, Leo, and where we're feeling, I'm talking about more like, I don't think we will be in a position of thinking it's a good idea to cut fire staff positions. I don't think it's reasonable, nor could we support 15 on a shift, or even the 9 on a shift that Chief Lowe would love to get us to at some point in time. We just don't have the space for it. And at the end of the day, that's a really high bar. I think, though, that 6 people on a shift that we have right now should allow us to drop without overtime. And it gives 2 teams of 2 plus a floater, which on shift, you've got 2 people would go out on most ambulance calls. So, or initially staff many ambulance calls. So that gives you the ability to run both of your ambulances, which we're seeing high double ambulance call volume, where both of them get called out at the same time. And it allows a floater at
So-
5, and that's as low as I would go.
And then there's 2 people for the fire truck,
No,
saying?
right
We
now,
have 2 people on 2 ambulances, that's 4 people. And if we have
2
4 people
oh.
on a shift.
well, then you have your calls for 3. So that gives you could have 2 people in the ambulance, 2 people in the 2 people, we should let Chief do this, but 2 people in each ambulance. A third, because about 60% of our calls require 3 in an ambulance. Because of main EMS rules. And you've got your captain left behind to manage the calls coming in.
So you said 4 shifts of 4 people.
4
That's
shifts,
not working out in my head.
No,
So
no.
Just a little slower.
4 shifts of 6 people is what we have right now.
Yep.
Shifts of
6
6 people
That's with the
With-
safer.
with safer.
We've had 4 shifts. It still doesn't quite add up, I guess, but
Well-
okay, we can get into those. My other question was when we're talking about fire.
Yep.
When did we take over the ambulance? Or when did the town?
1996.
96, okay, so it's been for a long time.
And I will say, if you talk to Captain Hardison, who was there, I think in 96, he will tell you how things have shifted incredibly in the last 30 years.
Yeah, and that's, that's a long time ago, obviously. And when you say Old Town won't do these runs, do we have to do these runs? I'm confused a little bit about that.
So,
Because I've heard
yeah,
that they don't go to Bradley or they don't, like, we are or something. And that's,
so, based on history, the answer is, we would. We have the general way it works is if you get toned out for a call, you go to a call. Unless it was crazy outside your license limit. And we've always done that. We've always, When another department says they need us, we go. When we say we need another department, they come to us.
There seems to be a lot of value in that kind of collaboration. One piece that I'm unclear about that maybe intersects with this is you mentioned something about our licensure and what's required of that. And I'm curious what different kinds of licensure exist,
Sure.
and does like Old Town have a different one that enables the, like, how does that work?
So Old Town, I can't speak for.
Okay, we'll leave them out of it, but another hypothetical entity.
So the way I understand it is that we tell dispatch and main EMS who we are providing service for. And if we get a tone, we go for that service. So Orono is one of the larger non-Bangor services in the region. You'll see the same thing like down in Hamden, what they'll do for kind of their section. Orono has historically gone when requested places. Old Town has contracts for lots of small communities without EMS service. At least one of those entities has elected not to use their service anymore. And so they are trying to stand up a ambulance service, BLS, basic life support. At the end of the day, it would be better for the entire region if they had advanced life support system there, service. It would be a lot better for Orono as well. So the choice is we can support them and run ALS when they need us, in hopes that they will build their service and help with the regional demand and take some of the pressure off us. Have I answered your question?
That definitely helps. Yeah, I don't know as we're going to solve like the problem of ambulancing in our part of Maine with 7 of us tonight, but.
I don't think we can.
Yeah.
I think that ambulancing in the state is a mess.
Yeah.
And I think that the more internal or regional capacity that we can build, the better it will be for everybody. Because much like structure fires, where we don't have those 15 people that roll out of the station when the tone goes off, we have trained firefighters from other places that can come back us up.
Yeah.
We don't have as much of that right now on EMS, and the sad part is EMS is driving 75% of the calls.
Yeah. It does make me wonder, and this is, again, we're not going to solve it tonight. It's just my wondering. I'm thinking about like what sort of Mitch was saying last week about the working group that's thinking about systems change in other ways that he was part of. And I'm curious whether there are working groups that are tackling this, and
So
do you have a thing?
I can tell you that there's a regional group right now looking at whether we can collaborate. It's a spectrum of everything from collaboration to consolidation of ambulance.
There's a bill that the Health Coverage Insurance and Financial Services Committee will hear having a work session on Thursday about EMS responses, because so many municipalities are having such a hard time. And 30%, 20 to 30% of calls don't involve transport. So transportation. So unless it's a cardiac event or like a hypoglycemic event, the ambulance shows up and they don't get paid anything for helping, us doing the assessment. So this bill would require reimbursements for services for transports, but also the no transport calls. So some of that paramedicine that we talked about getting involved in. So that is a start of helping, because so many of these, these calls that cost you the same amount of money to show up, no matter what you do. So I'm hopeful that there'll be some movement there in terms of.
If it can flow through the state legislature and become standardized for insurance companies. I don't know about other ambulance services, but we do not have legal staff that I'm willing to pay to help negotiate boilerplate, contracts with Anthem. We just got done with one. And we just accept the boilerplate.
Yep.
We just say, this is what you're willing to do. So if there would be willing to pay us for things that we're not transporting to the hospital, probably save them money in the long run because we're a lot cheaper than the hospital. But that would be helpful to us. I think one of the things we're gonna run into when we look at consolidating or sharing EMS services is you have some communities like Orono, Bangor, Old Town, Hamden, Brewer. Let's leave Brewer out of it, Hamden, that have paid incredible amounts of money to build these services. And so when you look at how much taxpayers are paying for the service, and then you go to another community where they don't have EMS service, maybe Northern Light ran just on a per call basis for them or free, or they don't want to pay for the service. So they want to consolidate and they want to have a say in structure and decision making, but it's a really heavy lift for them to get to what it costs per capita to actually run the service.
And it sounds like we're technically not that bad when it comes to collecting revenue
Oh,
and the cost of what it, so I mean, the delta there doesn't sound horrible. I'm still, and for the conversation when we speak with them, I'm still confused if we even have 6 people on a shift and at least 2 go on an ambulance, we get 2 ambulances out, 2 or 3, we got 1 person. Who drives a fire truck when?
That's it. Start calling.
so
the
I
chief.
will tell you, do you know who's been taking a lot of calls lately?
Sophie Wilson.
No, no, we would get sued if I
The
did that.
chief?
The chief.
Yeah.
Jeff
That makes sense.
is running a lot of paramedic calls. And that's why you sometimes see his buggy flying down the road, is because he's headed to a call. It is, when I tell you, when I look at our department heads and I tell you they're working department heads, like.
But I guess the other piece to that is if we're leaving community to go do that, and then we're short shrifting our service here in town, that's something that I would like to understand also.
I've had calls, I've had conversations with the chief when there have been a time or two that we have been truly pulled outside the catchment area. Normally, we stay within the general Old Town, Greenbush area, this general area. But what happens, if you watch fire departments, whether EMS related or fire related, to the degree that they can, it kind of becomes a waterfall of VZ comes if we're out for any length of time. Now, they don't have EMS, they've got first responders. But it's at least somebody who knows a little bit and can do basic first aid and stuff like that till other people can arrive. But in general, the resource is low in the region. We are positioned that Bangor will come if we really need them. Old Town comes for mutual aid. You can't count on mutual aid to run your everyday calls. And if we were calling them all the time, we would hear from them and they would probably threaten to stop coming. That's, but for we're out and we're not going to turn that over fast enough. We've had the engine with the chief and another firefighter respond to EMS calls because that's the vehicle that we had with a go bag in it. So they're creative. But yeah, I have that same concern. I think the chief is trying to balance the need generally in the region and make sure that we have coverage here.
And this is with 8 extra people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 8 extra people recently, and those have been kind of the bigger plus 10 since 2014.
Yep.
So, guess are we? It's are we building this and then for other people? And that was your point, I guess, that there's a big investment here that other communities aren't making. It drags us to them because they're not making them.
Suggest is that is a great conversation to have with the chief.
Yeah.
Who knows that. Yes,
That's Thursday,
Thursday.
isn't it?
If you can wait just for
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple,
Yeah.
couple of days, I would feel much better because I'm just gonna confuse you and probably lead you astray.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thank you for this conversation. I found it really helpful. I have a different question that will take us away from public safety and onto a new topic. Is that cool?
Go.
Great. So I'm looking at number 12, I guess, on this. It's on page 3 of this thing that Sarah sent around. And I am curious. So during the lean years, when we were getting less revenue sharing from the state, sort of how did we deal with that? Was it through cuts in our programs and staff? Was it drawing down our financial reserves? Was it some of both? Because I do think that's a really useful thing to understand.
I don't think it was really the drawing down the reserves. We have, I think there was a time when we took an extra 150 out of fund balance to just as general tax relief. But in general, I think we've really tried to be between $300,000 and $400,000 a year in that unassigned use of unassigned fund balance. We dealt with that in a couple of ways. One is I think we stretched staff a little thinner. We tried to move positions around, like there was a half-time person and out waiting on customers when I got here downstairs in the town clerk's office. When we saw a need to increase capacity in finance, we moved that half position to finance. So really, I think we tried to absorb as much as we could in the back office as we could. The places that got cut were places, unfortunately, that people love things, but that aren't mandated. So rec really took it on the chin when council was looking for money. I think that we also got really good at kicking the can when it came to capital investment. And we saw that in 2020, which is why we have the bond, which has the big projects in it. And why we're so aggressive in getting, when you look at the infrastructure, the increase in the capital infrastructure, there is a significant increase there, but the draw to the taxpayer is still relatively stable. And I think that's one thing that looking at expenses only you miss is that those expenses might be funded by non-tax revenue.
Talk about the capital at
so-
a different meeting. Is that going to be?
Capital, when a department head comes in,
Mhm.
we're supposed to be talking about operating and capital for each one of those departments.
So far, we haven't had departments that have had big changes in capital. They're
Exactly.
coming next, right?
Public Works
will
and
come?
Public Safety are the
The two,
big
right?
ones.
Okay.
But it's not, so we've talked quite a bit about kicking the can down the road with the infrastructure, capital infrastructure investment that created, I'd call it a cliff, but it would be more like a vertical climb when we backed up so many projects and needed to make that bond investment in capital infrastructure. At the same time, councils made decisions, and I'm not critiquing their decision because the decisions council make are the right ones.
That's democracy for you.
But when we were trying to save money, we had a police cruiser that needed to be replaced, and we didn't follow the regular cycle. And the answer was, well, let's try something different. And what we learned is the cycle is a cycle for a reason. And we're learning that now when we don't have those worn out cruisers that are no longer good for frontline. I know I'm going to get in it and it's going to run and there aren't going to be a ton of breakdowns. but could really still be used as administrative vehicles. So we're learning that. The biggest place that we kick the can and still have, and we still don't know what the dollar is gonna be for it, is in capital facilities. And if you look, this year isn't even trying to get us all caught up. It is just trying to take a bite at a really big apple, and it's almost $300,000, or is a $300,000 increase. So those capital investments, I think, really are how we tried to get away. And I'll also say, council did a lot of
Just choosing your words carefully.
I'm trying to figure out how to say it.
Yeah.
Jeff's here.
It's all Jeff's fault. I don't.
You brought me into the conversation. There was significant upward adjustments to our assessed value as well.
Meaning we were getting less from the state or?
No.
We were getting less from the state, but we had significant increase in our assessed value in those years,
Which brought on more people.
which brings more people, more revenue. So we were able to maintain, and they were counteracting each other and keeping us at a level we didn't have to increase the number. Don't bring me in.
All right. Keep going, Sophie. So Sophie,
I think in many ways, town government functioned like a small town for a long time. And as expectations on government have increased, we need the tools
Yeah.
to be able,
We're in the
to-
donut hole.
huh?
We're got big community expectations, small town resources, particularly when half our valuation is, not taxable.
Yep.
So it comes with that, and it's a tough, wrestle your arms around it, and that's kind of the tough spot that, our community is in, and we pay a price to live here. So that's kind of the.
although when you look at the FTEs that have gone up, right, it is mostly in fire, which, I mean, I'm not saying people don't want good fire coverage, but it's also not the thing you hear people clamoring for in town, right? I mean, Parks and Rec, we've heard clamoring, or
So they
if
need.
the library gets a
Yeah.
cut. I know they would if it
Yeah.
happened, but I'm just saying, I don't think that's really a demand from the public, is what I'm saying. Like, I know we're gonna hear more on Thursday, but I haven't heard that from my constituents, like, please get us more firefighters. I don't ever hear. I have heard people who look at the numbers saying to me, what the heck? Like, why have we added 10 fire positions? Which is why I wanted to be able to explain it. And I'm feeling better that I can, but I mean, as far as community pressure, I don't think we get that about fire. We've gone up on public works and fire primarily, and also economic development. When you look at these FTE numbers, we've gone up teeny amounts in the library. I think we did get public clamoring about environmental services, and we responded to that very clearly, right? And we're beginning to bring Parks and Rec back up, which we've had public clamoring for. So I mean, as far as where the push from the public comes, I think it's maybe in a different place than where we've mostly grown, and probably for good reasons, but I think that's a gap to explain to the public sometimes.
I think there is a balance between what the public wants
Right.
and what it takes to safely and professionally provide a service. And I'm gonna go to Sonia's comment about police, like less police. And I would say in general, you can decrease service levels. The problem, what the addition to the police department that we had a few years ago was so that we could actually staff 2 police officers overnight. We had one person working in a community of 11,000 people all by themselves, which there is no moniker that says
You can't
that
open the
that's safe.
library without 2 people, which
Yeah.
probably gotta have 2.
So the, when you look at FBI.gov, which kind of lays out staffing, it talks about 2.4 people for every 2.4 police officers for every 1,000 people you have. I did the math for
On duty.
Sonia,
or on-
yeah. for the department.
Yeah.
So maximum staffing for us in terms of patrol is 4. So you think about a Friday night when the college is here, is when we would be at max staffing. Usually Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. So we are definitely not huge. What we've tried to do is allocate our resources in a way to respond to the public through the development of the community policing division, to really look at the director of community policing as an individual who is doing more than traditional law enforcement.
And you're also not gonna get the things that we value in terms of, a police department that understands community policing, inclusiveness, and how to manage, the bias training and things like that. I think we want from our police, we want our police department to model. You're not gonna get it if they're on a shoestring, if there's only, if, you know what I mean? It's just, it's those trade-offs. And it's just manage it from a management perspective. That's, you have to give up things if you don't have enough people. So those are the kind of things we push aside.
And another thing on the public safety issue that comes to mind is that we said as a council that we want to be inclusive of all of the separate groups, including not only bringing more college age community members and younger community members into our process, but also inviting elderly community members and supporting our older population. And that's a population that requires a really robust emergency services division. And
It's interesting because I remember candidates nights when we actually were here and somebody would always come to the mic and say, the university there, why we have such ambulance needs.
Yeah.
And the data just does not support that our older population drives our ambulance calls significantly.
so we don't hear from
University drive the fire truck, it seems like it does.
No, no,
No,
There was a time, Leo,
not this time of year.
yeah, no, there was a time when we were headed to campus all the time. Our calls right now, we have definite, if you looked at a heat map, places that we go to most. And campus would be on there, but not any brighter than some other places in town.
Do we actually have that heat map or?
Yeah.
You don't make it if you don't.
Yeah, don't make one. I'm scared.
Got it.
Uh-huh.
It'd be fun to see.
Just to
That's not my house.
Just a point on the police, and then this was from the data you gave us last year, but I mean, we've had 14 to 15 since 2000.
Right, that hasn't
So that
grown.
really
That's been
hasn't-
very stable.
Hasn't gone up.
And understand that the one we added way back a few years ago was because we brought on like 2,000 people at the Avenue and the Grove, which also brought $600,000 of property tax.
Yeah, so that seems like one, but again, it's been fire and mainly public works where primary growth has been.
Hey, Sophie, on the capital that you were talking about in answer to Sonia's question, I just wanted to be sure the bond in 2020, that was the 2.25 million, right?
Yep.
Okay, just want to be sure. All the rest were just, whatever you say, refinanced, right? At that point in time. So the 2.25 is the only new bond that happened.
In 2020,
Yeah.
we refunded
Yeah.
the other portion and 2.25 was new.
Was the new one.
Yep.
Perfect. I have still a couple questions back on the previous page. Is everyone okay if I cycle back to those?
I think better.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to be sure. So number 5, just my analysis of things is correct that we haven't really added new programming. As we've had this, increase on our operating expenses line of the 2.7 million over 3 years. I know we're looking at it closely and it's mostly personnel, salary, benefits, the additional people in the fire department. But am I missing anything other than the rec program growing that's happened for any significant new programming? When I look at the budget, the only number I saw going up was rec.
So, Public Works, new programming would be the environmental services
Okay, thank you.
piece.
So the environmental services is new. And is it my understanding that that position has brought in a lot of grants, like it's mostly funded itself in grant money, or am I wrong on that?
It has, no, I mean, it's brought, they have brought in many grants. Those grants don't pay salary.
Right, but for programs.
But for, yeah, for programs, I would say more importantly, what that position did is it took all these things that council and community wanted us to move forward on, that we had no staff resource to move forward on. And we had tried to kind of cobble it with the environment committee, which advisory is good to talk to staff about big picture stuff. That is not the way to get work actually accomplished. That's work by committee is probably the least efficient way to create a plan for brown tail moths.
Sure, thanks. And then the rest of these, like 6, 7, and 8, if you flip the page over that has FTEs, I looked at what an answer was to 6, 7, and 8 about the 2.7 million. Because it's hard to tell, but Sophie provided so much amazing information. It was now easy to find the answer to most of these questions. And I just wanted to make sure, Sophie, that I didn't get anything wrong on that. When I looked at your 2020 to 2023 budget by expense center document, that thing was like gold. I hope we will get that every year, like at the beginning of the budget process. It was so amazing. So I wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to be 100% sure I didn't, misrepresent anything on
So,
here. So
I'm just gonna say that we better spend some money to get a report extract built, because that took me 16 hours to do.
that's terrible. And I'm sorry about that. That does not sound good. But it was amazing in what it answered. It really answered a lot of these big picture questions. So I agree. We should talk about how we get that without you having to spend hours.
No,
We
Seems
can't
like
like,
this
it's
is
not
like-
ready rate.
Software.
software allows me to break down in by budget, by expense. So I can look at how to do it differently. I didn't have enough time to play.
So there are tools that we can invest in, however, we
Yeah.
are not.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's be sure we do that because I
About
certainly don't want you to spend that kind of time again, but it was amazing. It helped a ton to see the overview of what was going on. And I just wanted to be sure there's, nothing, I took these numbers directly off that page. So for council to see, it was basically each year a 0.6 million increase in 2022, 2023, and proposed 2024 budgets for salaries and benefits. So it was pretty much the same. And what was interesting to me about that was that 2022 was before the step increases started, but the actual salary and benefits bump was equal as far as I could see there, and no big addition. You see, I put FTEs addition on there also, so no big jump in FTEs. So were we already trying to bring those salaries up before we even made this step plan? Is that what I can see here?
Part of the goal is always.
Right, I'm hoping. We were trying, right?
Always trying. But 2022 was also 2021, we scaled back a lot and we didn't give any raises. And we budgeted, we didn't fill a couple of positions that people weren't happy with the service level, so they came back.
Yeah.
Um,
So part of what you see in the growth is that 2021 was the COVID scale back year.
2021 was the COVID scale back year.
When you say 0.6, that's not benefits, that's just salary.
That's together. I did the math by hand to add them together. I have my calculator and made a spreadsheet. So they're approximately 0.6 each year for salary and benefits together, what they went up. What's confusing about that is it doesn't match in 2024 what we were in the budget binder. So if you read that top point, and we can look at this later, but something's off because the budget expense center shows an increase of 0.6 for salary and benefits. And the budget binder, which I'm guessing is the more accurate, shows the 773, 782. So like almost 0.2 million more. And I'm not sure where that disjoint is.
When you looked at your percentages, were you taking that from all funds?
I wasn't looking at percentages here at all. This was
No,
actually,
but when you looked at your data, were you
No.
taking it for all funds?
no,
So the 777 included the grant fund, so it includes Safer Grant and some
yeah,
other.
but I subtracted out the safer grant and it still doesn't add up. So you and I should look later at that detail. Something's a little bit off there, Leo, but it's basically close. So it's pretty darn close. My question really is, when you look down, the professional services line is the other thing that you can see that's grown pretty significantly. So you'll
You looking at?
flip over this page at FTEs to the other side. And I looked at this great document that Sophie created for us and was able to answer the question kind of what was this 2.7 million. I don't think Jeff has that. If there's an extra copy, if
Yeah.
anyone can pass it.
So are you
Um,
talking cumulatively?
Yeah, so the 2.7 comes
So I
from,
don't think, do I have that?
I thought it went all the way around. I passed
I
it,
think-
sorry.
Here, you can- You got it, you got it.
At cumulative, I can tell you that professional services have gone up $177,222 because of after-school lifeguards and the assessor.
Sorry, I didn't hear. I was distracted. Go ahead.
After school lifeguards
Which
and
line
the
are we on?
assessor, professional services
Okay, after-school lifeguards, what else?
and the assessor.
Uh-huh.
Then when you look at increased tip fees, increase is in the recycling collection, increases in municipal solid waste costs, IT consulting, because we eliminated a position and added there.
Right.
Up almost $340,000 total, just for those.
For which ones? The ones you just listed? The lifeguards, the assessor, the IT?
No, yeah, yep.
The lifeguards, the assessor and the IT consulting? Because the other thing, recycling and solid waste was on TIF. That's different, right? Okay, so that's it. So that's it. After school lifeguards, assessor and IT consulting is what happened to the professional services line.
Well, and also
No,
employers.
and those other things I just said.
Oh, sorry, the recycling and solid waste
Tip
also?
fee, recycling collection, and solid waste disposal.
Also
all-
our consultant.
They're professional services. And IT consulting,
Got it.
all be professional services,
Yep. So that's where we've seen those increases.
a lot of them.
So that pretty much gets us, I mean, we get to 2.5 almost, or 2.4, and the remaining three are just sort of evenly, 0.3 are evenly spread. So that kind of answers the questions on page 2. Is kind of what I wanted to show people, that I looked at that, and that's kind of there.
Email us this.
I can, I haven't yet. I literally finished this an hour before the meeting. So I did not get to email it. I did, I think, have a question at the end, but someone else go in the meantime.
Just to check your math.
Yeah.
614 is what I get for just wages, not benefits, from 23 to 24.
Which document are you looking at, Leo?
The one that she just provided by budgets
Yeah, just-
approved, proposed, all funds.
I'm sure I can get to it if you give me a minute.
So I remember the time, it's, rather than have the discussion, I just don't want to do math in
Yeah.
public.
Fair.
Yeah, let's talk. I mean, I can look at it. If
Check
there's a
those, but I'd
mistake,
like
I
to
will
hear your-
definitely
your
double check.
thoughts.
Leo, you should check them. So I'll do
Yeah,
it. I
and one
think
of,
you're right.
one of you who, double checks each other, report back
Yeah.
at the start of Thursday with what you find.
So Sarah, did you have another question?
I do, but someone else should go if they want.
Well, we're getting close to the wrapping up, so why don't we hear it?
Well, I guess I have two maybe. I mean, one is that I think it's just hard. It's gonna be hard, right? Because we need to bring our staff up to wages where we want them to be. We're gonna hear more on Thursday about the fire services and kind of, I mean, that's clearly the biggest area of growth that's happened in these 3 years. And I just think there are still gonna be some hard decisions, because it is still hard to say to the taxpayers, we've been getting, 0.7 extra mil or 0.3, 0.13 from the state extra this year, and we're still raising taxes by 0.2, million. And it's just hard. It's hard to say to people, we're getting a whole lot of extra money and we're still going to raise taxes. So I wish it was easier than that. This is where the hard jobs and the big bucks that we get paid, which is nothing, by the way, for anyone listening, hardly anything.
I think it's $1,000 a year.
Right, right. It's 1,000, right?
But they're good
They're good
suggestions.
questions. I mean, there are great suggestions of how we cut some things. And I guess, I don't know where I'm at, but I appreciate this bigger view picture, because it allows me to start thinking about, do I want to come in at a budget that's increasing taxes at all, or would I rather see it coming down with the amount of money from the state?
So there are two ideas that have not been brought forward yet. Can I?
Yes, please do.
The first is, I was really looking at Rob's infrastructure budget, and I don't want to what's the word? I don't want to artificially deflate that because I think it's really important that you stay at a consistent draw. I think consistent is almost more important than the dollar level. So when we looked at an outlier there was he's at 881. We normally would want to be between 800 and 850, 800,000 and 850,000. So when I looked at the TIP, downtown transit oriented TIP district dollars available, it looks like we could take the retaining wall repair / maintenance and pay for that out of the downtown transit oriented TIF district, which would save $50,000 general fund draw. So that was one question, whether you want to do that. The other question is a little more complex, and I have not put it in the budget because it involves using ARPA money. So one of the big bumps on the equipment side that we're seeing is we have been able to reserve or raise money and put it into a reserve for future spending, $75,000. Year one, 75,000, year two, year three, we had been able to appropriate between $75,000 and $100,000 to buy a new ambulance. Our ambulances are on a rotation. So the ambulance is with us for 6 years. It spends 3 years in primary position, then moves to secondary position, which is kind of a joke these days because it seems like it's all primary, and then after it's been 6 years, it gets moved out of the PD. So we're buying an ambulance every 3 years. Doing it in that way, we were able to kind of keep a more consistent draw on the general fund taxes. Last time we bought an ambulance, we were able to bring it in that $200,000 area because we thought we would get fancy and we only bought the chassis and we moved the patient box and the old patient box and put it on the chassis. There's a reason why a lot of people don't do that. It's not something we would recommend again. We've had problems with that. So when we went out for this to get a budget estimate, instead of in the 200-ish range, we're looking at an ambulance at 383, which is after we reduce the scope of what we were looking for. So Chief and I think that one option that we would have is to set us up on a new schedule. This particular ambulance is not in great shape and it needs to leave the team. So our thought was it would make sense if council wanted to think about using the balance of the reserve, which is about $185,000, and $198,000 of ARPA money to buy this new ambulance. That sets us up next year of being able to put $100,000 a year into reserves. It would be part of our regular, but for 4 years, which would give us enough to buy an ambulance, have a new one, and continue on a 4-year cycle to replace an ambulance every 8 years. We're not in order to really make that work, we would still want to get this year's and start it afresh. So that would save $189,000.
Is that can kicking or not can kicking?
Yeah, right.
Well,
Does that feel, because you're
even if
stretching
you
from,
took,
Taking
even if you took
ARPA.
the 100 out, you could drop it by 98,000 because we could, even if you only use 98,000 for ARPA money and kept the 100 in there, you'd have that set up for the appropriation next year.
so is it stretching the cycle though, you're saying from a 3-year cycle to a 4-year cycle? And does Chief feel comfortable with that stretch?
So
Here on Thursday, maybe?
I would talk to him on Thursday about
Yeah.
it, but Chief is, he's pretty good to advocate for himself.
Good with that. Yeah.
He's good at that.
And Jeff, I think the very last thing I have is on page 4.
Yeah.
I guess I do want to say, I think those sound like interesting, good options to consider. I would point out that it's it's just, it's taking money from somewhere else. It's not, they're not.
not ongoing.
not really cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a relevant
I
point.
think for the ambulance, it's less about a cut for me and more about a way to ensure that we can raise an appropriate amount of money, so we're not back in this kind of a having to spend so much money.
Yeah.
in
I-
one year.
Like I said, I think they're both interesting options to
Yeah.
discuss and whatnot. I just think it's.
And Leah, don't you feel like the things that address capital are somewhat different than the things that address operating expenses that way? Because
little
taking
bit.
a big capital thing off does have a longer term effect into the future, whereas, you know, the operating expenses, if we don't stop them from growing, that's a whole different problem, right?
Yep.
I would also suggest that when we calculated the $800,000 to $850,000 a year for capital infrastructure, we were not thinking retaining walls. We were thinking roads and sidewalks.
Uh-huh.
Sarah, what was your?
Oh, my last thing
point?
is just sort of at the top of page 4, there's data about how our taxes have grown over the time period I could look at when I did this, which was 6 years. And I just think it's important to notice that too, that, you know, over the last 3 years, they've gone up by 0.7 million. And, you know, over 6 years, a little less, it's between 0.5 and 0.6, actually, but I just think that is important to look at, that we had a lot of money coming in from the state. So, you know, additional monies in those same 3 years coming in from the state were 3.4 million. And this is still what taxes have gone up. And I just do think we need to remember that and mostly look at the trend. What concerns me is that we don't look at 1 year and say, oh, this is great because we took taxes down this year. What concerns me is before we start building a budget every year, I'd love to see at least 5-year data on how taxes have been affected over a 5-year time period, because 1 year doesn't really, you know, give us enough data to know how we're impacting our taxpayers. And there's a lot more detail about this that you guys can all read through at your leisure that's there. But the basic concept is just, I would like to request as a council that we always, before we begin budgeting, look back at least 5 years, maybe ideally even 10, on what the tax rates have done and how that affects taxpayers. So I don't know if anyone else feels like that, but that was important to me.
It's a good point. I think disaggregating the school from the town is a little disingenuous though, because our taxpayers get the whole bill. So I'd like to see,
But we don't control the schools at all. I mean,
we don't control the schools, but we still pass the bill on. So I think if we're going to look at the trend of either increase or decrease on the municipal side, we're looking at it as a tax bill that holistically gets passed on to the public. We also need to look at the school and the county.
great.
I just
have
think
that,
like
so.
a better, fuller picture is useful.
The only comment I would make is I care more about focusing on spending than obviously ultimately it's to drive a lower tax bill. But I think if we're focused on spending, I feel better about being able to explain this. Like, okay, we've gone up a typical 3 or 4%. And guess what? Unfortunately, the state gave us less money. Now, hard decisions are made, or we're gonna. So I really feel that the spending thing is, for me, is more important. It trickles down. I get it and agree to the tax dollars that we're spending. So I do care about that. But there are things beyond our control, which will be what the state gives us from year to year. So.
I think there's
Just a
multiple- right.
side note to your comment, I guess.
I think
is
that's
how
really
look at
important.
this.
I think Jeff's comment is too. I think there's multiple ways to look at how our impact is, but I think no matter which way we look, we need to look longer than just 1 year into the next when we start our budgeting process, so that we're coming at it, having a feeling of what we've been able to do in the last few years, specifically because we don't control state money, for example, and it may go up and down. So seeing our longer term trends, some years we may not be able to do it. We may have to up taxes for people, but then on the other years, we need to be sure to bring it down.
Yeah.
When we can do it, when
And
we're
that's-
getting a windfall from the state, to me is the time to be bringing it down, I guess is my point. And when we look at our budget numbers for the last 6 years, it's almost the opposite. We were keeping taxes very flat for the 3 years before the state money came in. And when it came in, our taxes simultaneously started to go up. So that's a little bit hard, you know, for me to explain to folks. If you look at the data sheet for 3 years when state money was tight, we were keeping taxes pretty darn level. And when state money went way, way up, taxes also went up at that point. So I think we got to look at that. Whatever we do, I want to look at the 5-year trends or 6-year or 10, whatever people pick. And I'm done. Thanks.
So
Appreciate you all so
before
much.
We close tonight. I'd like to invite anybody in the public who has another comment. Yes, Jeff, please.
I want to applaud the council for engaging in this, and Sarah for articulating these questions. I think they're important questions. They're particularly important because as I've talked with almost every one of you at this point, when I was the chair of the council, we had 40, 50, 60 years of cumulative experience on council in any given year. And now with Cheryl's resignation, we have 5 years experience among the 7 councils. It's not at all surprising to me that you have all of these questions. And you need to get the answers to these questions. And so I think has done an incredible job responding to your questions. They're questions that you have to ask or you're not doing it. So I think that's excellent that you're doing this. But another thing that hasn't been mentioned tonight is the mill rate. And that is an important metric, very important metric, and hasn't even been mentioned. Just looking at gross taxes, tax revenue that comes in. You have to look at that in terms of the assessed value of the community, which allows the community to support raising those tax revenues and spending them. And the mill rate incorporates that very nicely into one metric, and it's something we need to look at as well.
I would say one tricky thing about that obviously is the reeval that happens because that completely distorts the mill rate. That's so, yeah,
You have to figure that.
valid point. Like, I don't know what we do, or, you know, at the end of the day, people care about the bill they're paying. So in theory, when all of our valuations went up, if taxes remained the same, the mill rate change would have changed, but it didn't affect me in my pocketbook.
If you look at the history of the mill rate as one metric, yeah, you got to figure that in there when that changed. Right?
I have that data with holding the property values constant, Jeff, so I can bring that back to council if they want. I have the mill rate comparisons holding constant before the reevaluation and after if people want it. So I can.
The other, my other comment is that focusing on FTEs, number of FTEs, and looking at that metric as a standalone metric has its usefulness, but particularly in terms of the fire department, in order to provide the same level of service that you had last year, given the changes in the workplace environment, it now takes more people to deliver that same level of service.
Yeah.
That's just a fact of changes that have occurred that are beyond everybody's control in this room. It's just the way it is. It's going to take more people to provide that same level of service.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for all your service as well and for meeting with all of us, and thank you.
So seeing no other comments, we'll close our workshop for this evening. We'll be back. Do we have an online comment?
No, I don't know. How do you?
No, I don't see a hand and I haven't heard Bell chime in. But Bell, do we have anybody online?
There's nobody with their hand raised online.
Thank you very much. So, okay, so we'll see you all in 48 hours, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
For everything. She's black.